The morning sun cast long shadows across the elegant gardens of Ashford Manor as Elizabeth Margaret stood by the tall windows of her private sitting room. Her delicate fingers traced patterns on the cool glass while she watched the groundskeepers tend to the rose bushes that had bloomed magnificently this spring. At 28, she possessed a quiet grace that had captured the hearts of everyone who met her. But today her usual radiant smile was nowhere to be found. James Alexander emerged from the adjoining study, his footsteps heavy on the polished wooden floors. The weight of the morning's telephone conversation still pressed against his chest like a stone. He had always been the strong one, the pillar that everyone leaned upon. But today he felt as fragile as the crystal vase that held Elizabeth's favorite white lilies on the mantelpiece. "The doctor's called again," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Elizabeth turned from the window, and he could see in her eyes that she already knew what he was about to say. They had been together for 12 years, married for 8, and words had become unnecessary for the most important conversations. Elizabeth moved toward him with the same fluid grace she had possessed since childhood, when she would dance through these very halls as a little girl visiting her grandmother. Her illness had not yet stolen that from her, though they both knew it was only a matter of time. The doctors had given them 6 months, perhaps 8 if they were fortunate. The cancer that had started so quietly, so secretly, had spread through her body like wildfire through dry grass. "How long do we have?" she asked, settling into the burgundy leather chair that had been his grandfather's favorite reading spot. James knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. They felt smaller than he remembered, more delicate, though her grip remained surprisingly strong. 6 to 8 months, he replied, his voice catching on the words. "Dr. Harrison wants to discuss treatment options, but—" He couldn't finish the sentence. They both knew that the treatments would likely steal more time than they would give, filling their remaining days with hospital rooms and medical procedures instead of the life they had built together. Elizabeth nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. She had always been able to read him better than anyone else could read a favorite book. "Then, we need to make them count," she said with a determination that surprised them both. Every single day. The afternoon brought a parade of well-meaning visitors. Elizabeth's sister Charlotte arrived first, her usual composure cracking the moment she saw Elizabeth's serene acceptance of the situation. Their mother followed shortly after, clutching a handkerchief and struggling to maintain the dignified bearing that had carried her through decades of social obligations and family responsibilities. James found himself playing the role of host and comforter, ensuring that everyone had tea and trying to steer conversations toward happier memories. He told stories about their early courtship, when Elizabeth had been working at the local children's charity and he had been a young lawyer just starting his practice. Their friends laughed through their tears as he recounted how Elizabeth had once convinced him to dress up as Father Christmas for the charity's holiday party, complete with a fake beard that had made him sneeze uncontrollably. As evening approached and the last visitor departed, James and Elizabeth found themselves alone again in the sitting room. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with photographs documenting their life together. Wedding pictures, holiday snapshots, images from charity events where Elizabeth had worked tirelessly to help children in need. "I want to write letters," Elizabeth said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "To everyone we care about. To the children at the charity. To any children we might have had." Her voice remained steady, but James could see the tears gathering in her eyes. "I want them to remember me as I am now, not as I might become." James moved to sit beside her on the small sofa, pulling her close against his chest. She fit perfectly there, just as she always had, as if they had been designed to complement each other. "We'll write them together," he promised, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Her hair still smelled like the lavender shampoo she had used since they first met. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the old house settle around them, Elizabeth spoke into the darkness. "I'm not afraid of dying," she said quietly. "I'm afraid of leaving you alone." James felt his chest tighten with an emotion so intense it was almost physical pain. He had always been the one who fixed problems, who found solutions, who made everything better. But this was something he couldn't fix, couldn't change, couldn't make disappear with determination and hard work. "You could never leave me," he whispered back, his arm tightening around her. "You're part of me now. You always will be." Outside their bedroom windows, the moon cast silver light across the gardens where they had walked hand in hand countless times, planning a future that now seemed impossibly fragile. Elizabeth fell asleep first, her breathing soft and regular against his chest. James lay awake for hours, memorizing the sound, the feeling of her warmth beside him, the way her hand curled trustingly against his shoulder. Tomorrow would begin their countdown. But tonight they were simply James and Elizabeth, husband and wife, facing the world together as they always had. In the distance, a night bird called to its mate, and James found himself hoping that somewhere in the universe, love like theirs could transcend even the final goodbye that waited somewhere in their uncertain future. The weeks that followed their diagnosis conversation settled into a routine that somehow managed to be both heartbreaking and beautiful. Elizabeth insisted on maintaining as much normalcy as possible, rising each morning at 7 and joining James for breakfast in the sunlit conservatory overlooking the gardens. She still read the morning newspaper aloud to him while he prepared their coffee, her voice steady and warm as she shared local news and commentary on world events. James had taken an indefinite leave from his law practice, something that would have been unthinkable just months ago. His partners understood completely, having watched him build his career while never losing sight of what truly mattered. The senior partner, Marcus Whitfield, had insisted that James focus entirely on Elizabeth, promising that the firm would be waiting whenever he was ready to return, if he ever was. Elizabeth threw herself into completing projects she had started years ago. She spent hours in her study, a cozy room lined with bookshelves and filled with comfortable chairs, working on the children's book she had been writing and illustrating for the charity. The story followed a little mouse named Benny who discovered that true courage came not from being fearless, but from doing the right thing even when you were afraid. "It's almost finished," she told James one afternoon, showing him the latest illustrations. Her artistic talent had always amazed him. She could capture entire emotions in a simple sketch. "I want the children to have this. Something they can keep and remember that even when things seem scary or uncertain, they have more strength inside them than they realize." James watched her work, marveling at how she could create something so hopeful while facing her own mortality with such grace. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that Elizabeth was teaching fictional children about courage while demonstrating the real thing every single day. Their friends and family began visiting more frequently, though Elizabeth had established gentle boundaries to prevent their home from becoming a constant parade of well-wishers. Tuesday evenings were reserved for Elizabeth's book club, a group of 6 women who had been meeting monthly for nearly 5 years. Instead of their usual novel discussions, they spent these evenings sharing memories and telling stories that made them laugh until they cried. "Remember when Elizabeth convinced us all to take that pottery class?" asked Sarah, the group's unofficial leader and Elizabeth's closest friend from university. She was so determined to make the perfect vase for James's birthday, but every single one came out looking like a wonky bowl. Elizabeth laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. "James still has them all," she said, glancing at her husband with affection. "He uses them to hold pens in his study, and he tells everyone they're artistic statement pieces." These moments of laughter became precious gems that James collected in his memory. He found himself paying attention to details he might have overlooked before. The way Elizabeth's eyes crinkled when she was truly amused, the soft humming sound she made when she was concentrating on her artwork, the graceful way she moved through their home as if she were dancing to music only she could hear. Dr. Harrison visited monthly for checkups, but Elizabeth had made it clear that she wanted minimal medical intervention. She was willing to take medications that would help with pain management and maintain her quality of life, but she refused aggressive treatments that would leave her weak and sick during the time she had left. "I want to live until I die," she explained to the doctor during one visit. "I want to be present for every day, every conversation, every sunset. I don't want to spend what time I have fighting something I can't win." James admired her certainty, even as it terrified him. He had researched every possible treatment option, read medical journals until his eyes burned, and contacted specialists around the world. Part of him wanted to fight, to try everything, to exhaust every possibility. But he respected Elizabeth's choice, understanding that it came from a wisdom and self-knowledge that he was still struggling to develop. One evening in early summer, as they sat in the garden watching fireflies dance among the roses, Elizabeth brought up a topic they had been avoiding. "I want to plan my funeral," she said matter-of-factly, as if she were discussing the next day's weather. "I want it to be a celebration, not a somber affair. I want music and flowers and stories that make people smile." James felt his chest tighten, but he forced himself to listen. This was important to her, and If he had learned anything during their marriage, it was that Elizabeth's instincts about these things were usually right. "I want that string quartet we hired for our wedding anniversary party," she continued, her fingers absently stroking the soft petals of a nearby rose. "And I want everyone to wear bright colors. No black, no gray, no navy blue. I want the church to look like a garden party." They spent the evening planning together, and James discovered that there was something oddly comforting about the process. It felt like one final project they could work on together, one last way to ensure that Elizabeth's personality and preferences would shine through even after she was gone. "Promise me something else," Elizabeth said as they prepared for bed that night. "Promise me that you'll keep living after I'm gone. Really living, not just existing. Travel to all those places we talked about visiting. Try new restaurants. Maybe even learn to dance properly." James felt tears threaten, but he managed to keep his voice steady. "I promise," he said, though he couldn't imagine how he would possibly keep such a promise. The world without Elizabeth seemed gray and empty, like a house with all the lights turned off. But promises to Elizabeth had always been sacred to him, and this one would be no different. He would find a way to honor her wishes, even if he couldn't yet see how that summer gave way to autumn. The changes in Elizabeth became more noticeable, though she continued to face each day with remarkable strength. She tired more easily now, often needing to rest after activities that had once been effortless. James learned to read the subtle signs, the way she would pause slightly longer between sentences when talking, or how she would grip the banister more tightly when climbing the stairs. Despite her growing physical limitations, Elizabeth's spirit remained undimmed. She had finished her children's book and was working with the charity to arrange for its publication. The story of brave little Benny had captured everyone's hearts, and advance orders suggested it would raise significant funds for the organization. "Mrs. Patterson called today," Elizabeth told James one afternoon as they sat in the conservatory. Mrs. Patterson was the charity's director, a formidable woman in her 60s who had dedicated her life to helping children in need. "They want to name the new children's library after me, the Elizabeth Alexander Children's Reading Room." James felt a surge of pride mixed with the ever-present sadness that had become his constant companion. "That's wonderful," he said, meaning it completely. "Those children will benefit from your love of books for generations to come." Elizabeth smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression. "I keep thinking about all the books I'll never read," she said quietly. "All the stories I'll never discover. It seems almost silly to worry about that when there are so many bigger things, but somehow it makes the whole situation feel more real." James understood exactly what she meant. It was often the small, everyday things that brought the reality of loss into sharp focus. The half-finished crossword puzzle on her nightstand. The garden planting books she had been studying for next spring's plantings. The reservation they had made for their wedding anniversary dinner at their favorite restaurant, still months away. Their friend circle had expanded to include other couples facing similar challenges. Dr. Harrison had connected them with a support group that met monthly, and while Elizabeth initially resisted the idea, she had grown to value the connections with people who understood their situation in ways that others, however well-meaning, simply couldn't. Margaret and David Thornton had become particularly close friends. David was facing his own battle with cancer, though his prognosis was somewhat more optimistic. Margaret had become Elizabeth's confidant in matters that were too difficult to discuss with James, understanding instinctively that sometimes a spouse needs protection from certain fears and worries. "Margaret and I talked about legacy today," Elizabeth told James one evening as they prepared for bed. "Not just the big, obvious legacies like the library or the children's book, but the small ones. The way we treat people, the kindness we show, the love we give freely." She paused to brush her hair, a nightly ritual that James had come to treasure. Even this simple act had become precious to him, something he watched with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail. "I realize that our love story doesn't end when I die," Elizabeth continued. "It changes, but it doesn't end. The way you'll remember me, the way you'll carry what we've shared together, that's part of the legacy too." James felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever Elizabeth spoke so openly about her death. He had grown better at managing these emotions, understanding that his role was to listen and support rather than to fix or change what couldn't be changed. The holidays approached with a bittersweet intensity. Elizabeth insisted on maintaining their traditions, decorating the Christmas tree together, hosting their annual holiday party for friends and family, preparing the elaborate Christmas Eve dinner that had become legendary among their social circle. "This might be my last Christmas," she said pragmatically while hanging ornaments on the tree. I wanted to be perfect. Not perfect in some impossible way, but perfect in the way that really matters. Full of love and laughter and all the people we care about. The holiday party was indeed perfect in exactly the way Elizabeth had envisioned. Their home filled with the voices of 3 generations of friends and family, united in their love for Elizabeth and their determination to make the evening special. James watched his wife move through the crowd, still graceful despite her increasing frailty, touching lives and creating memories with every conversation. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had gone home, Elizabeth's sister Charlotte found James in his study. She's remarkable, Charlotte said simply. I don't know how she does it. How she stays so positive, so focused on everyone else's happiness. James nodded, understanding exactly what Charlotte meant. She's teaching all of us how to live, he replied. Even while she's dying, she's showing us how to really live. As the year drew to a close, James and Elizabeth began working on what they privately called their memory project. Together, they went through photo albums, home videos, and letters, selecting and organizing the materials that would help their loved ones remember their life together. I want you to remarry someday, Elizabeth said one afternoon as they worked through a box of photographs from their honeymoon in Italy. Not right away, and not because you're trying to replace what we had, but because you have so much love to give, and because I can't bear the thought of you being alone forever. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of their marriage, filled with tears and protestations, and ultimately with understanding. James couldn't imagine loving anyone else the way he loved Elizabeth, but he could see the logic in her request. She wanted him to have a full life, even after she was gone. As winter deepened and Elizabeth's condition began to decline more noticeably, their focus shifted from planning for the future to treasuring each present moment. Every sunrise became a gift, every shared meal a celebration, every quiet evening by the fire a precious jewel to be carefully stored in memory. The countdown had begun in earnest now, though neither of them spoke of it directly. They both understood that time was becoming more precious than gold, more valuable than any treasure they had ever possessed or could ever imagine possessing. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a cruel irony that wasn't lost on either James or Elizabeth. As the world around them burst into new life, Elizabeth's own life force was slowly but steadily ebbing away. The cherry trees that lined their driveway bloomed magnificently, creating a tunnel of pink and white petals that had always been one of Elizabeth's favorite sights. I want to see them one more time, she said on a particularly beautiful April morning. Her voice had grown softer over the past few weeks, and James had learned to listen more carefully to catch every word. Walking had become difficult for her, so James arranged for a wheelchair that would allow them to tour the gardens together. As they moved slowly along the familiar paths, Elizabeth pointed out changes and improvements she wanted James to make in the coming years. The rose garden needs more yellow roses, she said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. And that corner by the old oak tree would be perfect for a reading bench. Somewhere peaceful where you can sit with a book and remember good times. James made mental notes of everything she said, understanding that these garden plans were really instructions for his future healing. Elizabeth was creating spaces where he could find comfort after she was gone, places designed specifically for remembrance and renewal. Dr. Harrison's visits had become more frequent, and the conversations more serious. Elizabeth's condition was progressing faster than they had hoped. The doctor estimated weeks now rather than months, though he cautioned that these predictions were imprecise at best. I want to die at home, Elizabeth told Dr. Harrison during his latest visit. In our bedroom, surrounded by the people and things I love most. The doctor assured her that arrangements could be made for hospice care that would allow her to remain comfortable in familiar surroundings. James found himself struggling with a complex mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to fight against the inevitable, to research new treatments or seek second opinions. But a larger part understood that Elizabeth had made her peace with what was coming, and that his role was to support her choices rather than impose his own desperate hopes. Their friends and family had begun saying their goodbyes, though no one used that word directly. Instead, they spoke of visits and shared memories and expressions of love. Elizabeth's book club held a special meeting in her honor, presenting her with a leather-bound journal filled with notes from each member about what their friendship had meant to them. You taught us all how to be better friends, Sarah wrote in her contribution. You showed us that kindness isn't just about the big gestures. It's about remembering someone's favorite tea or sending a note just because, or always making space for one more person at the table. Elizabeth's former students from her volunteer teaching days at the Literacy Center came to visit, now grown adults who credited her with igniting their love of reading. One young man, Thomas, brought his infant daughter to meet the woman he called the teacher who changed my life. I named her Elizabeth, he said, tears in his eyes as he placed the sleeping baby in Elizabeth's arms. I wanted her to have a name that represents everything good and kind in the world. Elizabeth held the baby with the careful tenderness of someone who understood how precious and fragile life could be. James watched his wife's face as she gazed down at the sleeping child, seeing in her expression a complex mixture of joy and profound sadness. She's beautiful, Elizabeth whispered, gently stroking the baby's tiny hand. Absolutely perfect. When she looked up at James, he could see that she was thinking about the children they had never had, the family they had planned but never quite managed to create. It had been one of their few real disappointments, though they had found ways to channel their nurturing instincts through Elizabeth's charity work and their relationships with friends' children. As April progressed into May, Elizabeth spent more time in bed, though she insisted on maintaining her daily routines as much as possible. James had moved his work into their bedroom, setting up a small desk by the window where he could handle correspondence and phone calls while remaining close to her. They developed a new rhythm for their days. Mornings were for gentle conversation and shared reading. Elizabeth loved listening to James read aloud from their favorite books. Afternoons were often spent with visitors or working on final projects. Evenings belonged just to them, quiet hours when they would talk about their life together or simply sit in comfortable silence. I need to tell you something, Elizabeth said one evening as the sun set through their bedroom windows, painting everything in golden light. These past months, even with everything that's happening, have been some of the happiest of my life. Not because of the situation, but because of how we've faced it together. We've been more honest with each other, more present, more grateful for small things than we ever were before. James understood what she meant. The approaching loss had stripped away all the unimportant distractions and revealed what truly mattered. Their love had been refined to its purest essence, concentrated and intensified by the knowledge that it wouldn't last forever. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, he told her, meaning it completely. I didn't know that was possible, but you've taught me that love can keep growing even in the face of loss. Elizabeth smiled, the expression still radiant despite her physical frailty. That's what I want you to remember, she said. Not that love ends when someone dies, but that it grows and changes and continues in new ways. The love we've shared will always be part of you, part of your story, part of how you move through the world. As May moved toward June, they both understood that their time together was measured now in days rather than weeks. The hospice nurses had become regular presences in their home, kind and efficient women who helped maintain Elizabeth's comfort while respecting the intimate nature of these final days. James rarely left Elizabeth's side now, sleeping in the chair beside their bed and taking his meals on a tray in their room. Friends and family called regularly, but visits were brief and carefully scheduled to avoid overwhelming Elizabeth, who tired easily despite her determination to remain engaged with the world around her. The garden looks beautiful, she said one afternoon, gazing out the window at the roses that were beginning their summer bloom. You'll take good care of it, won't you? Not just for me, but for yourself. There's something healing about working with growing things. James promised that he would, adding this to the growing list of commitments he was making to honor Elizabeth's memory and her wishes for his future. Each promise felt like both a weight and a gift, responsibilities that would help give structure and meaning to the life he would have to learn to live without her. The final days arrived with a strange mixture of inevitability and surprise. Despite all their preparation and acceptance, James found himself caught off guard by the reality of watching Elizabeth slip away. She had grown very weak, sleeping most of the day and speaking in whispers when she was awake. Yet her spirit remained vibrantly present, shining through eyes that had grown large in her increasingly delicate face. Dr. Harrison visited daily now, adjusting medications to ensure Elizabeth's comfort. The hospice nurses had become like family, understanding without words when James needed a few moments alone with his wife, and when he needed their gentle support. The house filled with flowers from friends who understood that words had become inadequate for the magnitude of what was happening. On a Tuesday morning in early June, Elizabeth woke with unusual clarity and energy. "I want to sit in the garden today," she told James, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I want to feel the sun on my face and smell the roses one more time." James carefully helped her into a lightweight dress she had always loved, a soft blue cotton that matched her eyes. Moving slowly and stopping frequently to rest, they made their way to the garden bench beneath the climbing rose arbor. Elizabeth had lost considerable weight, but she still moved with an echo of her former grace, and James found himself remembering the young woman who had captured his heart all those years ago. They sat together in comfortable silence, Elizabeth's head resting against James's shoulder while bees hummed lazily among the flowers. A pair of cardinals nested in the nearby holly bush, and Elizabeth smiled as she watched them tend to their young. "Life continues," she observed, her voice barely audible above the gentle sounds of the garden. "That's what I find most comforting. The world will keep turning, seasons will keep changing, flowers will keep blooming. Our love story will become part of the ongoing story of this place, this life we've built together." That afternoon, Elizabeth asked James to read to her from the children's book she had written. He had read it dozens of times during her illness, but he understood that today was different. Today felt like a farewell performance, a final sharing of something she had created with love and hope. "Benny the Mouse was very small," James began, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "But he had a very big heart, and sometimes that's all the courage anyone really needs." The story followed Benny as he faced various challenges, each time discovering that bravery wasn't about being fearless, but about doing what was right even when you were afraid. Elizabeth listened with her eyes closed, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When James finished reading, she opened her eyes and looked at him with infinite tenderness. "You've been my Benny," she said softly, "brave and true and full of love, even when everything seemed scary and uncertain. You've shown me what real courage looks like." That evening, their closest family members gathered at the house. Elizabeth's sister Charlotte came with her husband and teenage children. James's brother Michael arrived from Scotland, where he had been working for the past several years. Elizabeth's parents, now in their 70s, sat quietly beside their daughter's bed, holding hands and sharing memories of her childhood. Elizabeth spoke with each person individually, offering words of love and guidance that James knew would be treasured for the rest of their lives. To her teenage niece Emma, she said, "Never be afraid to love deeply, even if it means risking heartbreak. The love is always worth it." To James's brother Michael, she expressed gratitude for years of friendship and asked him to look after James in the difficult days ahead. As night fell, the house grew quiet except for the gentle sounds of family members sharing memories in the sitting room downstairs. Elizabeth and James were alone together in their bedroom, surrounded by the familiar objects that had witnessed their entire married life together. "I'm not afraid," Elizabeth told him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I feel very peaceful, very loved, very grateful for every day we've shared together." James felt tears on his cheeks but found that he wasn't overcome by sadness. Instead, he felt a deep sense of privilege of being part of Elizabeth's journey, honored to have loved and been loved by someone so extraordinary. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For 12 beautiful years. For showing me what unconditional love looks like. For making me a better man than I ever thought I could be." Elizabeth squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "The love doesn't end here," she whispered. "It changes, but it doesn't end. Remember that in the hard days ahead. What we've shared together will always be part of you, part of your story, part of how you love others in the future." They talked quietly through the night, sharing favorite memories and expressing gratitude for their life together. Elizabeth dozed occasionally, but always woke to find James beside her, keeping his vigil with the devotion that had characterized their entire relationship. As dawn broke on Wednesday morning, painting the bedroom walls with soft pink light, Elizabeth's breathing grew shallow and peaceful. James held her hand and spoke softly about his love for her, his gratitude for their time together, and his promise to honor the life they had built by continuing to live fully even after she was gone. Elizabeth passed away peacefully at 7:23 a.m., with James beside her and sunlight streaming through the windows she had loved. Her final expression was one of complete peace, as if she were simply falling asleep after a long and satisfying day. James sat with her for a long time after she was gone, holding her hand and feeling both the immediate sharp pain of loss and a deeper sense of gratitude for having experienced a love so profound. The house seemed to hold its breath around them, as if the very walls were acknowledging the end of an era and the beginning of something new and unknown. When the hospice nurse arrived an hour later, she found James still sitting beside Elizabeth, tears on his face but an expression of quiet acceptance in his eyes. She was ready, he said simply. She wasn't afraid, and she wasn't alone. In the days that followed, James discovered that Elizabeth had been right about many things. The funeral was indeed a celebration, filled with music and flowers and stories that made people smile through their tears. The church overflowed with friends, family, and people whose lives Elizabeth had touched through her charity work and simple kindness. James wore a bright blue tie that matched Elizabeth's eyes, and he spoke about her legacy of love and courage without breaking down. He told the congregation about her children's book, about the reading room that would bear her name, and about the countless small acts of kindness that had made the world a little brighter wherever she went. Months later, as autumn returned to the gardens at Ashford Manor, James found himself sitting on the bench Elizabeth had requested beneath the old oak tree. He was reading one of her favorite books, and the roses were blooming magnificently in shades of yellow and pink. The garden was exactly as beautiful as Elizabeth had envisioned, and James discovered that tending it had indeed become a source of healing and connection to her memory. The love story of James and Elizabeth hadn't ended with her death. It had transformed, becoming part of the ongoing story of everyone whose life she had touched. Her courage in facing death had taught them all how to face life with greater appreciation and deeper love. And somewhere in the distance, a night bird called to its mate, and James found himself smiling as he remembered Elizabeth's prediction that love like theirs could transcend even the final goodbye. She had been right about that, as she had been right about so many things. Their love continued, different now, but no less real, no less powerful, no less transformative than it had ever been.